This is from the Joint Inquiry. It's the co-chair of the Joint House, Bob Graham, interviewing FBI Director Robert Mueller.
On October 7, over Mr. Tennant's signature, the CIA issued a declassification of certain information that had been previously contained in a national intelligence estimate. I'm going to read two paragraphs from that declassification. Should Saddam conclude that a U.S.-led attack could no longer be deterred, he probably would become much less constrained in adopting terrorist actions. Such terrorism might involve conventional means, as with Iraq's unsuccessful attempt at a terrorist offensive in 1991, or chemical and biological weapons. Saddam might decide that the extreme step of assisting Islamic terrorists in conducting a weapons of mass destruction attack against the United States would be his last chance to exact vengeance by taking a large number of victims with him. From what I read and speculate, there is a prospect that we might be underway with a U.S.-led attack which Saddam Hussein could no longer deter within the next 100 days. In that time frame, I want to talk about where we are defensively and offensively in protecting the people of the United States, especially here in our homeland.
The issue of Iraq has always been at the epicenter of most of these Gulf supported attacks, and which is, ironic because Saddam Hussein was opposed to bin Laden in the same way that Muammar Gaddafi was opposed to bin Laden. In fact, Muammar Gaddafi was the only Islamic leader to have an open arrest warrant for Osama bin Laden. Hardly anyone ever mentions this. Nobody really knows about this. And yet we deposed too, Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. And we always seem to back these radical fundamentalists to overthrow these Western-backed socialist Arab governments. And you wonder why is because, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf, and the United States considers educated Muslims a real threat to the establishment of this military new establishment for the government under the Project for New American Century, under the Oded Yinan plan, under the foreign policy guidelines of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, which they want to be the only true caliphate in the region. But by doing this, they need to get rid of the opposing governments that would openly criticize and probably fight back the three axis of evil, who I call the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Iraq was blamed for the 1993 World Trade Center attacks. In fact, the Iraqi government had come out against Judith Miller's declaration that they had been behind the 1993 attacks because Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind of the bombing, had an Iraqi passport, which actually was not even his actual passport. He had many names. He went by, his real name was Abdul Basit Karim, as allegedly it's his, birth name. He went by a lot of names, and he had a fake passport that, and then they used that to link with the Iraqi government. And it's when you have an ideology that is the essence of all these terrorist groups, whether it's Al Qaeda or the Islamic State, right? The essence of that ideology is called Wahhabism, or they always try to say now it's Salafism or jihadism. But it's the same thing. Comes under the pretense of one nomadic teacher. His name was Muhammad Ibn al-Wahhab. And he was from the Sunni school of Islam, but a small branch, actually, called Wahhabi. Now, his ideology didn't come right off the bat. He basically came under a lot of criticism and had to face conflicts, but ran into Ibn Saud in the 18th century, in which they created the first known Saudi state. And it was based on two centers. One was the military center under Ibn Saud, who had the army behind him. and the religious factor, Wahhabi, Ibn Wahhab, which is named after the founder. So Wahhabism and Ibn Saud created a state called the Emirate of Daria, which would later be named Saudi Arabia. Once Muhammad ibn Saud captured the cities of Hejaz and Najd from the Ottoman Empire. This ideology began to spread with illiterates, people who don't really read. They go to madrasas in the poverty-stricken areas of Saudi Arabia, the south, and they basically just recruit for these people that think that anyone who goes against this belief that that they are the only true Islamic sect, and that they can condemn other Muslims for not being Muslims, called takfir, and call other Muslims fake Muslims or munafiq, that this creates this fanaticism that they can actually kill these people because they're worse than the Yahud or the Jews or the Crusaders, the Christians, polytheists, or those who are apostates are worthy of death. But they don't go by the Quran, they go by the Hadiths, the school of Ibn Taymiyyah, the school of Ibn Hanbal, or Muhammad Hassan, or Ibn Qayyim, right? These are, or Ibn Taymiyyah, right? That's where the essence of Wahhabism came from, Ibn Taymiyyah. So Iraq would have zero to do with any of these attacks, 9/11 or the 93 bombing. And in the CIA, they were pressured by the Bush administration to find any type of link between 9/11 and Iraq. And what did they do? Well, they found one of the trainers of the Al Farouk, no, I'm sorry, the Kandahar training camp, which was led by Sheikh Ibn al-Libi. And Sheikh Ibn al-Libi was captured in Egypt. And the CIA found out about it, and they tortured him. And he basically told them that, yes, al-Qaeda was procuring chemical and biological weapons with the Ba'athist government under Saddam Hussein. Colin Powell was handed this information without vetting it. His assistant, Lawrence Wilkerson, who I've interviewed, basically saying, "Oh, can we trust this information?" And Colin Powell says, "Well, I'm going to go with it anyway because I have nothing else." And he went before the United Nations Security Council, and the world heard about how this testimony from a solid source, as Colin Powell would say, was basically the fire starter for the Iraq war, because the United States Security Council looked at the cartoon pictures by the U.S. government and said, well, those caves actually exist, those chemical weapons actually exist, we can go to war, in which 1.5 million Iraqis approximately died on the basis of a lie. Because when the CIA went to Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, found out he lied. They said, why'd you lie? Well, I told you what you wanted to hear so that you could stop torturing me.
First, on the defense. Director Mueller, what would you describe as our state of preparedness to deal with the embedded international terrorists who are within the United States, similar to the 19 who hijacked the airplanes on September the 11th, and how would you describe the acceleration of pace of attempting to identify the location, the scale, the skills, the nature of support and command and control for those terrorists who are living among us?
I don't have the figures in front of me, but I can tell you that since September 11th, the number of investigations that we have undertaken has doubled, if not tripled. The number of interceptions we've sought approval from the court for has at least quadrupled, if not more. The reallocation of, or the reassignment of 500 agents to counterterrorism has substantially assisted in our ability to enhance our coverage of individuals in the country who would do us harm. I will tell you also that with the issue of Iraq there, we have, and without an open hearing giving too much detail, focused on that possibility and are increasing our resources addressed to addressed to those individuals who might be in our country that might find this as an occasion to commit some sort of act were we to initiate some operation with regard to Iraq.
You know, that's funny because the FBI was the first agency the Bush administration went to try and find a connection between Iraq and 9/11. And what happened was that under a week, they found that there was no connection, and that because of that, the Bush administration was in such a rush because the neoconservatives under Richard Perle and Douglas Feith and their special office, the Office of Special Plans, was in a rush to try and formulate a foreign policy outline to blame Iraq for 9/11 attacks, to have the public accept the invasion of Iraq. And so Mueller here is trying to basically say that, yes, we were approached, and yes, we were looking for intelligence involving Iraq and 9/11. And as you could see, the deputy director of the CIA, John McLaughlin, is sitting right behind him, almost like a crow behind its carrion. But Mueller was in a tough spot and basically couldn't produce for the Bush administration. And therefore, there was nothing to produce. There's no connection. Never was.
So if you could summarize, what do you think should be the level of assurance that the people of the United States would have that we would be successful in defending them against this probability that Saddam Hussein would be much less constrained in adopting terrorist activities?
Well, I think we are doing, we are looking at every lead. We are looking at every possibility that comes to our attention of terrorists, not just terrorists who may be associated in one way, or directly or indirectly, with Iraq, but others who might use this as an occasion to exploit the opportunity to undertake an attack. I have a hard time telling the country that you should be comfortable that we've covered all the bases in the wake of what we saw they were able to accomplish in September 11th. I mean, that was a watershed in terms of the accomplishment of a group of individuals to come together, utilize modern means of technology in terms of their communications, their planning, their organization, their travels, a type of discipline that prior to that time I don't think we had seen. And so I am uncomfortable sitting here saying, look, we are taking every step, but based on the fact that we are taking every step, you, the American public, should not be aware that there is a substantial risk out there that they could undertake. And by they, I mean not just those associated with Iraq, but those associated with Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or somebody else. But I would be uncomfortable in saying that you should relax and say the FBI is taking care, or the FBI or the CIA is taking care of that issue.
Because you can't basically just tell the American people who live under a free democracy that they could sleep well, that, you know, every square inch of the border is being safeguarded by the military or the intelligence service. You can't, right? We got to have good faith in believing that people are good and people are bad. But if we're going to basically absolve people's civil liberties, or their privacy rights, right, in the hopes of preserving democracy, you don't have a democracy anymore. Okay, you have a authoritarianism, you have totalitarianism, religious fundamentalism, or extreme secular like an extreme secular government, where they're going to basically use ideology to supplant your basic rights as a human being, as a free human being. Groups like Al-Qaeda and Hamas or Hezbollah or Abu Sayyaf, or, groups of the Islamic State, right? They're not just born overnight. They didn't just wake up and say, we hate Americans and the way they dress. We don't like their belief and non-belief. Most of these groups, and this is very rare in terms of criminal, in the criminal underworld, where you have an enemy that basically tells you why they're doing what they're doing. Now, sociopaths don't do this. Psychopaths don't do this. Spree killers will do this. Mass shooters will do this because they want a manifesto, they want to be remembered. But in terms of like bin Laden or Abu Musab al-Zarqawi or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or Muhammad Atta or Abu Nidal, Ramzi Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the Snardev brothers. These are individuals who basically are telling you why they're doing it. And it has nothing to do with their own selfish desires, but has everything to do with their belief in God, or more importantly, their opposition to your repressive foreign policy, which are subjugating an entire peoples. Now, it's not like I have to defend myself here and say that, oh, I'm not defending bin Laden and these people. Bin Laden is evil, irredeemable. However, you have to listen what they have to say. Why are they doing this? Why do they, like Bush says, why do they hate us? They hate us because of our freedoms. That's for the simple-minded. There's a deeper meaning for this. And Ramzi Youssef, I always use this as the example. It's a perfect example because he gave, before he was sentenced to 240 years, I think of by Judge Nickerson or I forgot the guy's name, or Jack Weinstein, one of them, like an old, a really famous judge back in the day. He basically allowed Ramzi Youssef to speak before sentencing, and he took an hour. And he basically said that you claim we're terrorists, but you're the terrorists. You bombed Hiroshima, you bombed Nagasaki, you firebombed Dresden, you firebombed, the West fire Dresden. They firebombed, Germany. They firebombed Indochina. And you used orange napalm or orange that chemical compound. I forgot. I can't think of it, in Vietnam, right? And you killed millions of civilians during this. The oil for food program in the Gulf War. That's a big talking point for bin Laden. Well, Ramzi Youssef basically said, well, if you claim I am a terrorist because I'm opposing this, then I am proud to call myself a terrorist. So our foreign policy is so demonstrably evil that it would take somebody who is very embedded in ideology, or someone who has abandoned their apathy or their empathy for human beings, where they're a shell of themselves, apathetic, to see that we are creating the vacuum for these groups to exist always. Because in order to fight the oppressor, we have to fight them with unorthodox means. Hamas doesn't have a standing military. I mean, the Qassam brigades are the military wing of Hamas, but they're no match for the combined armies of the West. They might be a match for the Israeli IDF, maybe, but in terms of like fighting against the West. And this is why bin Laden wanted to draw the United States into a repeat of the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks. He knew he couldn't beat them militarily, but he wanted to drain them economically. And he got another gift when the American military in the West, the coalition partners like Australia, Canada, Germany, and France, and Japan, and China, and Australia, went to Iraq. And it cost $3 trillion for Afghanistan for 20 years, the longest war in U.S. history, only to have the Taliban take over the country in less than a month, less than 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks. It was a war of fruition. It was a fruitless war. A war that didn't even make sense. And maybe in the beginning when we bombed the Al-Qaeda training camps, like Al Farouk and Tanark Farms. But once we destroyed and killed Mohammed Atta, and once we captured Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah and Ramzi bin al-Shib and Mustafa al-Hassawi and Amr al-Baluchi and Ridwan Isamuddin, the bin Laden of the Philippines, Hambali, as they call it. Once we captured all these people, basically the threat of Islamic extremism was dying. And once we killed Osama bin Laden, and once we killed Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda basically was no longer the enemy that we have to fight. Now we have to fight against China, Iran, and Russia. They're the new ones. But guess what? Right now, regrouping in Afghanistan is Al-Qaeda, and even bigger than at any point under Osama bin Laden. And guess who's going to be blamed for that probably in the future? Iraq. All right, guys. Listen, thank you very much for tuning into the video, and have a great weekend. I'll see you next video. Oh, by the way, I did a video regarding the Dave Smith and Douglas Murray debate. And I tried to upload it to YouTube. It wouldn't let me. Copyright strike from Joe Rogan's company, the company that funds the Joe Rogan Experience. And I couldn't upload it. It's on Odyssey, on my Odyssey channel. I mean, go there. Go to Twitter, my Twitter account. I have the link up there. And I also upload to Twitter. So you can see it up there. I'm going to do a 4-part series on that. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. See you next video.